Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. And week one of college football is officially here. Drew, I'm pumped up. You're writing stories for CBS talking about the 2022 quarterback class. I'm fired up to get into that. We'll talk about some big recruiting weekends in the SEC and go down the list. And what else do we have here? We also get to talk about Oyster Boys freshman 15. Excited about that. Who are the top freshmen in the country? But Drew, you and I were talking about it before we jumped on the show. Maybe some interesting storylines. You have a spicy take in week one, a name that we haven't even talked about since maybe the transfer portal.
It is not a spicy take. You asked me, what are you looking forward to week one? There's a lot of things, okay?
Kind of a spicy take.
Yeah, one of them at the top of the list, Aidan Chiles. I feel like he has been billed as one of the top quarterbacks in the game, and I hope Aidan Chiles is one of the top quarterbacks in the game, Cooper. I mean, we had him ranked number 58 overall 2 cycles ago. I just want to pump the brakes a little bit. You know, a lot of hype around him. They open up Friday night. My Florida Atlantic Owls coming up to East Lansing. I think the line's hovering around 14 points. Again, I hope Aidan Chiles is good, but this is a guy that really hasn't played a ton of football, Cooper. I mean, go back to his high school career, was a late bloomer, had less than 100 snaps this past season at Oregon State. I know the camp reports are good and all that. I just want to see what Aidan Chiles is going to look like. Number one, because I want to be watching the game on Friday night as FAU. Like I said, they're going to be traveling up there. And FAU has had the number of some of these middling Big Ten programs as of late. Almost beat Purdue, almost beat Illinois last season. I think it's going to be a close game. So I want to see what Aidan Chiles looks like. That is one of my top storylines that probably no one else really cares about.
It feels like the hype train for him has just been unchecked from the moment that he landed as the number 2 ranked quarterback in the transfer portal, only behind former 5-star Julian Saint. And this was a guy that Drew just kind of like continued to inch his way up our board. We saw him in San Antonio at the All-American Bowl, really liked him a lot. Went to Oregon State, played the 1 year behind DJU under Jonathan Smith. Now, Drew, I don't think the hype train is going to slow down because you're talking about a 14-point favorite against your Owls. I expect him to go out there and play well. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to have more eyeballs on Aidan Chiles. So we'll see. The camp reports on him are glowing. Drew, I'm going to stick with the quarterback position and with another transfer. Cam Ward, a guy that has been talked about a lot. What I think is interesting about Cam Ward, I don't think there's a consensus yet in the scouting community. I don't think a lot of people are looking at Cam Ward and say, all right, yeah, this is like a for sure day one guy. If he would have came out last year, probably would have been an early day 3 guy. So where does he kind of end up? What does that game 1 against Florida do for him? Drew, I'm in love with this kid. Ryan Wilson at CBS Sports, I went on their podcast with the first pick. He had him projected inside the top 15 to the Las Vegas Raiders. Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's where I think we'll probably go, that range 10 to 20. But I think he can climb the board quickly. I think his playmaking ability going to be at the forefront of Miami. I think week 1, all these kind of like 2025 NFL mock draft scenarios are going to shuffle a lot based on what we see with the quarterback play. And that's a great segue into our next segment, the 2022 quarterback cycle here at 24/7 Sports. Drew, if I could give you one word to describe that cycle, what would you use to describe this for our audience out there after you've been digging in on it for the last couple of days?
Disappointing. I think that would be the term. And the 2022 quarterback class, let's first put this kind of little nugget out there. Remember, Quinn Ewers was in the 2022 cycle, and then he reclassified, skipped his senior year of high school, ended up at Ohio State. Now he's at Texas, played for the college football playoff, could be a first-round pick. So he was a part of this group. But we had 4 5-star quarterbacks, Cooper, Drew Aller, Cade Klubnik, Connor Weigman, Ty Simpson. I would think all these guys have underwhelmed to date, right? They are entering year 3. And, I made some calls yesterday because this was a storyline that was brought to me by Trey Scott, the editor at 24/7 Sports. Hey, it's kind of a big weekend for these guys. And he's right. I mean, because I think there was a lot of questions. And Coop, you said the NFL drafts, right? The mock drafts, the big boards and all that stuff. I mean, a lot of the guys I read that I respect. Dane Brugler at The Athletic. You mentioned Ryan Wilson at CBS Sports. You see a Connor Weigman, a Drew Aller in there, but they're towards the back of the list. And in previous years, think about this, Cooper, we had Caleb Williams and Bryce Young win Heisman trophies as true sophomores. Last year, it was guys like Quinn Ewers, J.J. McCarthy, Shadur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, all took major steps forward in year 3. So we got this 2022 quarterback class entering year 3. Some are redshirt sophomores, some are true juniors. And I still feel like we don't know what we have with these guys. And then, you start asking yourself, okay, did we get it wrong? Did we rank the wrong individuals at the top of the board? Should Drew Aller have not been up there? Should Cade Klubnik have not been up there? Connor Weigman, were we too high? Did we rank the wrong ones? And the short answer is no, because you dig into this whole class. I went 1 through 100 in the quarterback rankings, Cooper. And this weekend, week 1, there's only 7 for sure Power 4 starters in the class of 2022. So I mentioned those 3. You also got Rocco Becht at Iowa State. And I'm going to draw a blank on these other ones, but Noah Fafita at Arizona and Josh Hoover at TCU. So it's kind of an idea of what you have of these other quarterbacks. It seems like right now, and there's still time to go, down cycle at the position.
All right, so let me ask you a question. You say that, hindsight being 2020, we didn't rank them, essentially that, I don't want to say we got it right, but we got the order of it right. And if you look down the rest of the list, it's not like there's been a ton of success at this position in 2022. Drew, I think you mentioned the fact that these guys were juniors in high school when COVID hit, that global pandemic. How does that kind of impact their development? I would ask you, like, if going back to that, and it is important context, Drew. I don't believe that you were in your current position at the time, so that's important to add in there as well. But if you could shuffle the deck, or maybe you could say, you know what, I don't know if I'd have that guy maybe ranked as a 5-star. I know we feel the order of these guys is maybe somewhat, what we think they are today. But if you could go back and say, all right, you know what, maybe I'd like to have that back. Depending on what I've seen now versus what I see then, do any of those guys look like a potential, like, yeah, I'll take that one back?
I think Cade Klubnik, ahead of Connor Weigman, and those are 2 guys in Texas. I mean, I remember we got Cade at the All-American Bowl, and I did this big profile about how, his coaches, his parents call him the Golden Retriever, and he elevates all these individuals around him. And you see Cade in person, and we saw him, Cooper, at the Elite 11 finals this year. He was a counselor. I remember I was waiting for an Uber at the hotel, and he was standing there right next to me, and he is not the biggest individual. And you think about Drew Aller, you think about Connor Weigman. I mean, they have those prototypical frames, the ones we know that the Sunday evaluators love. So, yeah, I think Cade over Connor is certainly one that maybe we wish we could have back. And again, we still have some time to go. And I think the other thing is there is some bias here because we have had more exposure to Cade than any of these other quarterbacks. Remember, Connor Weigman was injured. He has missed some time. We've got a full sample size of Cade and him and Garrett Riley's offense. And so far, he hasn't been able to raise the ceiling of the individuals around him. Maybe that changes as he enters year 2. We get some of these freshman wide receivers, TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, who the folks there at Clemson seem to be very fired up. So I don't know. That's the one for me. Is there one for you when you look at the rankings that, hey, maybe we should have got it wrong, or hey, maybe we should have had this guy ranked higher. We had him as a 3-star prospect.
Yeah, I think there's 2 that stand out, Klubnik being one of them. I think the other thing, when you saw Klubnik in San Antonio, the point that you just brought up, if you were standing next to him on the street, you would just think he's another guy. Drew Aller has the look and feel of somebody that would go number 1 in the NFL draft. Connor Weigman is the best, I would say, athlete out of those 3 guys. And the other one, how about Ty Simpson? Has yet to see the field. What does that look like? Obviously, Jalen Milroe's been there. There's been some change in Tuscaloosa. It's going to be interesting to see. But is he going to play himself into an NFL draft choice, not even a day 1 or day 2 guy. But what does that look like for him? We saw glimpses of him against South Florida. It was nothing to write home about. So that's interesting. Drew, I do want to talk about Drew Aller a little bit. He was the number 3 player in 2022. He's the number 1 quarterback. He was ranked only behind Travis Hunter and Walter Nolan. This is a guy that went 10-3 last year, 13 starts. You mentioned he passed for over 300 yards against West Virginia in the first game of the season in Happy Valley. 1-3 record against top 25 teams. That's not just a Drew Aller issue. That's a James Franklin problem as well. Going back, watching the tape, and I watched it against Ole Miss. I watched it against Michigan and Ohio State. It just feels a little stale. And it's not just a Drew Aller issue, but it's kind of a Penn State issue. And you understand why James Franklin made the move to move on from Mike Yurcich and go to Andy Kotelnicki to bring him over from Kansas. Everything about what they were doing offensively, especially in the passing game, doesn't feel like they put Drew Aller in the best position to succeed. They also haven't done that from a personnel standpoint outside of the offensive line and the running back position. The receivers aren't good enough. So how is that going to change in year 3 under Drew Aller? That's what I find to be super interesting here, which is a pivotal year for him. It's just got to come together really quickly. The other take on this is, out of these 3 quarterbacks, there was one guy that played the game, and the other 2, the game played them. And I felt like that was Connor Weigman. Sure, he had limited snaps last year, gets hurt, ends up missing a lot of time. But you turn on the tape of Connor Weigman, he just feels like it's a completely different story when you're comparing him to Cade Klubnik and a guy like Drew Aller. The way that he responds to live bullets and the way that he plays the game, he is a proactive passer, a better athlete than the other 2, and that's who I'm comparing him to. But Drew, the more that I kind of dove in on him, the more fired up I was. And I wasn't a huge fan of Weigman coming out. It was really Gabe Brooks and the rest of the contingent at 24/7 Sports that really kind of cemented the fact of Connor Weigman being a 5-star. But you mentioned the fit there with Colin Klein and College Station. Like, I'm excited to talk about this game a little bit later. But out of the 3, out of a 3-game, 35-play cut up for each of these guys, this was the guy that I was like, okay, I can see Weigman going day 1. I can see Aller going day 2 on this current trajectory. And then right now, Cade Klubnik's probably in that day 3 range. So it's interesting to see how all those guys shake out. But the guy that I would be buying stock in right now would be Connor Weigman.
It's funny because he's the only one that has beat a top 5 team. He took down LSU as a true freshman. And I think what's interesting with him, 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. There's some continuity with Cade at Clemson, Garrett Riley. You mentioned the change there at Penn State. I love that change. But Coop, when I was going 1 through 100 in the rankings, I was going through every game these guys had started. And first off, there's only 2 quarterbacks from the class of 2022 that have started over 13 games. So it's not a ton. But man, I think the group as a whole collectively is like 1-30 against top 5 opponents. Now, a lot of them have lost to the same team over and over and over again. Your Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, they continue to lose to those. But I think you are onto something there. Let me ask you this. All 3 this weekend, big, spotlight games. Penn State traveling to West Virginia, rivalry game. That's at noon Eastern time. You also have Clemson taking on Georgia and that vaunted defense there in Atlanta. And then the nightcap, Texas A&M hosting Notre Dame. Which of these 3 quarterbacks do you think will have the best outing? Or it could be 2. Or maybe you want to spotlight the guy that's not going to do good on Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's the guy that I feel the most confident in, and I just explained this, would be Weigman. And the more that I study him, the more confident that I feel with Texas A&M going into that matchup with Notre Dame. I think that game's going to come down to the line of scrimmage. We know what Notre Dame's offense looks like, but in terms of quarterback performance, if you could give me one guy right now between Connor Weigman and Riley Leonard, it'd be Connor Weigman. That would be the guy that I would go with. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this game's in College Station. I think Connor Weigman is the guy generating the most first-round buzz, and for good reason, and that's going to be the guy turning a lot of heads. Outside of that, I actually think Klubnik did some good things down the stretch, like what he did in the Kentucky game, did some good things against North Carolina as well. Clemson started to figure it out, winning the last 4 games of the season. Klubnik's one of those guys, though, Drew, like the feel that I get on him, he kind of is what he is from a talent standpoint. He's not as talented as Aller, not the athlete that Connor Weigman is. He's going to be a high floor processor. And if you're going to be that type of guy, then you have to be able to protect that quarterback. And then you also have to be able to surround him with elite level talent. Now, they got some young guys in Wesco and TJ Moore, but asking those guys to go up against guys like Malachi Starks, Dalen Everett, and an experienced Georgia secondary, that's a big ask for them in their first game. So I don't know if we're going to see anything game changing. The guy that has all of the ability to play himself into a top 10 pick is Aller, and he's done some good things, but he's got to take some ownership and accountability as well. The talent is there, but everything that I talked about with Weigman, Aller is not there yet. I think the biggest thing with him is reps, and they got to do a better job putting him in a position to succeed. They have not done that in the last 2 years, and they failed miserably at that. So hopefully Andy Kotelnicki does a better job of that. But I think if you were asking me to put him in categories, I don't think we're going to see anything different from Klubnik. I think Aller's really got the most to gain. And Weigman, I just really kind of want to see him healthy. What's he look like after that injury? But those are the 3, Drew. I mean, the thing, your stats and your research into this class, like, to me, it's just like it's a bad class. Just kind of like throw it out the window. Like that's really all I kind of chalk it up to at the end of the day. And it's a lot of different factors that play into it, including a global pandemic that took away a really all-important junior high school year for these dudes.
Yeah, I mean, other 2022s that could start this weekend: Alex Orji at Michigan, MJ Morris at Maryland, Connor Harrell at North Carolina tomorrow night. I think the latter 2 might have fallen behind in the quarterback competitions there. So very interesting. The last guy, and then let's move on from this, who maybe has first round ceiling potential, Malik Murphy at Duke, comes over from Texas. When I was working the phones, one of the people I talked with was Brian Stump there, who runs the Elite 11 finals, and trying to pick his brain. Hey, do you remember anything from this class? And Malik Murphy is someone that he brought up right away. You know, Malik Murphy was in California. We know there was government restrictions there, more so than other places. Malik Murphy was also not a longtime starter in high school there at Gardner-Sarah. He had to sit behind someone else. So he brought up Malik Murphy right away in terms of someone that had missed out on developmental reps. When we talk about, the pandemic and how that changed things, you got to remember, Cooper, before that junior year, which is so key for development, you got 7-on-7 camps. You're working out for the Elite 11 staff. And for 6 months there, I mean, there was none of that. And I do think that has kind of hurt this class a little bit. And the other thing is that extra year of eligibility that the NCAA granted because of COVID. Think about it. Trey Scott said it in the Slack channel yesterday. Week 1, you're going to have starting quarterbacks across 7 different recruiting classes, which is wild to think about and wrap your mind around.
Pretty crazy. There is one quarterback in this list that has balled out, and I can't wait to kind of see what happens in terms of his Sunday potential. Noah Fifita, we should mention, high school teammates with Tedero McMillan and Keon Burnett over there in Arizona and Tucson. And Drew, there's been reports about Fifita's size, whether it's 5'9", 5'10". I'm going to put money down that the Arizona Cardinals are probably going to end up drafting Noah Fifita at some point on day 3. And that's going to be the backup for Kyler Murray. The beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right? It might not work for 31 other teams, but for a guy that is kind of a perfect fit in Arizona to back up somebody like Kyler Murray, I find that one interesting. So we'll see what happens there. Guys, just reminding you are locked into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. You can find Andrew and I every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. Please make sure to like and subscribe. You can also find us on Monday, 2 o'clock Eastern Time on CBS Sports Network, the 24/7 Sports College Football Show. All right, Drew, big recruiting weekends on deck in week 1. And we talked a little bit about Florida, Miami at the top of the show. That one in Gainesville this weekend, 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Florida they've done a really good job the last couple of years just in terms of stacking recruiting classes. This one in 2025, it just kind of seems to be more of wait and see mode. Ranked inside the top 25 at number 24, like I said, compared to the last couple of years, a little behind here, Drew, but starting to pick things up. Vernell Brown, Ben Haynes Jr., guys included in that Florida commit list. And they'll have a list of visitors, talented ones in Gainesville this weekend. Malik Autry committed to Auburn, the 5-star defensive lineman. DJ Pickett, another 5-star, committed to LSU. Dallas Wilson, a guy that we like a lot. Jarquez Carter and J.B. Hilson, 2 guys committed elsewhere as well. Drew, just a win over a top 25 ranked Miami team, Cam Ward, a lot of expectations. Florida, Miami. It's a big year for both these programs. Let's start with Florida. Like, how big would a win over Mario Cristobal be in week 1 for the momentum for the rest of the cycle for Billy Napier?
So here's my take on this game for Florida. A lot of noise surrounding Billy Napier, his future, what happens with one of the nation's hardest schedules. And I don't really think we know how this is all going to shake out. But let's say Billy Napier is able to get to 6 wins, 7 wins. Does that get him another season? I would think maybe yes, that would be the answer. And if one of those wins is over Miami, it's going to go so far on the recruiting front. Think about it this weekend, Cooper. This is the premier ticket if you are a junior or a senior located in Florida or Georgia. Florida State doesn't play till Monday night. Georgia is playing at a neutral site. Clemson is at a neutral site. LSU is playing in Las Vegas. There is one show in town if you want to drive to it on Saturday, and it's there in the Swamp. And if you look at the visitors list, it tells me that despite all of the uncertainty about Billy Napier and his future, kids are still interested in the University of Florida. You got multiple 5-stars expected. Auburn defensive line commit Malik Autry, LSU corner commit DJ Pickett, the top-ranked player in the Sunshine State. Oregon wide receiver commit Dallas Wilson. Ohio State defensive line commit London Merritt. FSU defensive line commit Javion Hilson. If Florida can win this game, right, and they do it in front of a rowdy crowd there in the Swamp, it is going to be loud. It is going to be hot. Those kids don't have to visit for the rest of the season. They don't have to see you play some of these other SEC games. It is embedded in their mind. Okay, I know what I saw there at Florida. They went 7-5. Billy Napier is coming back. Florida is now able to push the narrative. Hey, we're headed in the right direction. You saw what this fan base can provide. So I think it's a huge, huge, huge opportunity for Florida. And I think the other thing, Cooper, you said it, they're ranked 24th right now in the rankings. Like, I feel like a month ago, I wrote about it or was on this show. Florida was pacing for their worst recruiting class in the modern era. I mean, this was in like the 40s, 50s even. And they've won some battles down the stretch. Vernell Brown's a legacy. It should be a layup, but you still got to get him committed. Ben Hanks, the corner out of Miami, another legacy recruit. You still have to get him committed. So easy to poke holes in the recruiting class, but I do think Florida has done a pretty good job given the circumstances heading into week 1 of the season.
On the other side of this, do you think Mario is I mean, he's definitely communicating with some of these top recruits, but there's guys at the top of the list that I'm sure Mario would love to add, DJ Pickett being one of those guys. Miami had a hat on the table. You think he's saying, hey, DJ, why don't you go down to Gainesville for the weekend, make sure you check out that game and make sure you have a seat?
I was on the phone with someone on staff there in Coral Gables yesterday, and I said, recruiting section seems like it's going to be packed for you guys. He's like, oh, yeah, we know. We already have the list. So I don't know. Maybe if Miami wins, that recruiting section's right there in the end zone. Maybe some of the staff runs over and there's some antics in front of that recruiting section. Yes, everyone knows. In Florida and Miami are you read about it on Inside the U, Swamp 247. I mean, they're going to head for a ton of different in-state blue chip prospects. This feels like college football recruiting of old, where these games could sway. Even in the name, image, likeness era, they could sway, maybe turn the tide a little bit in a recruitment here or there. So I like that feeling. It makes me feel alive again, right? Actual on-field results, rivalries matter here with some of these battles.
It's just it's a tone setter game. I mean, the whoever comes out of that game as the victor is going to be riding high, and there's going to be a lot of momentum, especially on the recruiting trail. But it's such a pivotal year 3 for both of these programs, and the team that comes out on the wrong end, you're just kind of like, how's the fan base going to respond? If Florida, it's like, all right, here we go again, and now we have this very difficult schedule, arguably the hardest in all of college football. And if you're Miami, you're probably sitting there wondering, like, all right, when is this actually going to start? When are we going to start seeing results? That is a lot of expectations for both those programs and Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal. So it's week 1 of the season. Maybe not in the lens of the 2024 season. Is it a must-win game? But in the Billy Napier and Mario Cristobal era, like if you zoom out, this is a must-win game for both of these teams. So it's going to be really interesting. Drew, before we move on, who do you like in this game?
I don't know. I'm going boots on the ground. I'll be there in Gainesville. No pick for me. I'm on the call.
I like that. Yeah, the neutral Kirk Herbstreit analyst here. All right, give me Miami. I'm all in on Cam Ward, just about in every fashion. So I'll go with that one. DJ Lagway, like we've been warned, you're going to see him.
DJ Lagway play? Does he play?
I think they have to. And I think he gives them something they don't have. So yeah, I would expect to see him 5 to 7 snaps. That would be my guess. Respectable, okay. Right? And then maybe you kind of tune him up and see what he's got. It's a big spot for a freshman.
I feel like Florida hasn't dangled it enough to where like Miami's got to prepare for it. But maybe I just haven't been in that lane and haven't seen it.
Maybe that's what they're trying to do, They're just trying to keep it quiet a little bit. So we'll see there. All right, Drew, we mentioned Texas A&M, Notre Dame, and this is a big one. Number 20, Texas A&M hosting number 7, Notre Dame, 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. The headliner, 5-star uncommitted receiver Jerome Miles, the former Ole Miss commit. He's coming in on an unofficial visit. Tom Loy, who's in the chat right now, give him a shout. Reports over 100 blue chip recruits across 3 classes expected, including 18 of 20 commits from the 2025 cycle for the Aggies. That is a class that ranks number 8 in the country. And Andrew, you and I have talked about this. The Aggies and Mike Elko, they have not been in the news, and it's pretty refreshing, especially when it comes to recruiting. We know they're one of the most talented rosters in the country. They've been in the top 5, now in the top 10 with Mike Elko. Obviously, a lot of defections. That's not all bad for Texas A&M. Had some bad apples he had to get out of there as he tries to change the culture. This is a huge game for A&M and the Aggies, Drew. I just feel like he's pressed all the right buttons over the offseason. We talked about Connor Weigman. We love the prospect of him and what he can be on Sundays. At Texas A&M, I talked to some people around that program. They just kind of like, quiet confidence of like, hey, I think we're going to be a pretty good ball club this year. I wouldn't be shocked if Texas A&M wins this game and wins it in a way where people are kind of looking at them a little bit different in 2024.
I would agree with you. I mean, if you're going to ask me to make a pick on the front end here, I like the Aggies on Saturday night. Coop, I had to do a CBS Sports HQ hit about this a little bit ago. When Tom Loy sent me the visitors list for this weekend, my jaw kind of dropped. I was like, whoa. I mean, they have dialed it up, and I'm not versed enough to claim this is the biggest recruiting weekend ever for Texas A&M. But I'll say this. When Mike Elko was hired to replace Jimbo Fisher, it was not because of his recruiting chops. He was not known as a guy that won a ton of battles. Yes, has he had success on the recruiting trail? Sure, but it was an X and O's hire. It was, I'm establishing a culture. And then you look up, and Texas A&M's got the number 8 ranked recruiting class in the country. They got one of the hottest wide receivers in the country visiting in Jerome Miles and Cooper. I don't think it's smoke and mirrors. I mean, you dig into this recruiting class top to bottom, ask me where the strength is. I think it's the depth. I think it's the back end. I think they got a bunch of guys with NFL traits, developmental upside. So I love this group. I think it's impressive. And for a program that signed the highest ranked recruiting class ever 2 years ago or 3 years ago in the 2022 cycle. Like, I feel like they're recruiting better right now, which is kind of surprising to say, just given everything that has happened there at Texas A&M.
They're recruiting better from like a program fit standpoint, and it's interesting because you go back and obviously we have everything to do with the rankings, and you see the guys that they bring in 2 to 3 years later. You go back and you look at some of these guys, Denver Harris, Smoke Bowie. You go down the list of the guys that have flamed out and haven't worked there. Not necessarily all guys that you would want in your building. Chris Marshall, and listen, I hope they bounce back. I hope they have long and successful careers. What Mike Elko is doing is a little bit different. I feel like the vetting process initially throughout the high school talent identification, the evaluation has just been a lot better. And I said this, they still have a very Duke type of feel to them. Everybody that is going to be guys that go through that evaluation and recruiting process, they have to check boxes, not only tangibles, but intangibles as well. They have a certain type of player and a certain type of person that they are trying to marry together. And I think Texas A&M is doing that. Drew, I get more and more fired up. I get about them the more I learn about the type of guys that they're recruiting. Hassan Longstreet, Jerome Miles, you mentioned coming on campus. You think about that marriage and what that could look like. They're very smart about how they go about their business. And you mentioned it's not the type of way that grabs all the headlines, but how they're building the back end of their roster, especially in the state of Texas, with the players that they have taken, guys that are position flexible, guys that have prototypical size and athletic traits at their position. Those are the things that you look for. That's how you build sustainable depth on a national championship contender. Josh Pate talks about all the time. This place has all the resources to be one of the best programs in the country. It needs the right person to prime the pump. I do believe that is Mike Elko, and I do believe that this program is in a position to have immediate success, maybe more success than people have anticipated in 2024. All right, Drew, last one here, staying in the SEC, Auburn. Auburn's been one of the hottest teams on the recruiting trail. Not quite the matchup of the other two as they host Alabama A&M at 7:30 on SEC Network. You got a prediction?
We got to talk about Auburn puts out their depth chart. I read a lot of depth charts last night. Wife was watching The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. I don't know which one we're on. Just going through the depth charts and got to Auburn's. They have 37 players listed as starters on defense. I think every name was bolded. And then you read into the quotes from Hugh Freeze, and he's like, yeah, we're just going to play a lot of guys. It's like, okay, thanks, coach.
Do you have a strong opinion on that one way or the other? The or this guy, or this guy, or that guy? Like, I don't know. Does it go away after week one? I guess that's my question. I've never really been paying attention to that.
Well, you've never been on the media side. So you've never had to like get a game notes emailed to you on a PDF on a Monday, and you're kind of like scanning through it. And yeah, I mean, does it change? No, but here's my thing. All these schools want fans to pay for players, right? They want them to donate to this collective. Okay. So I think there's certainly a faction of fan bases that are the diehards that can name the entire roster, but you have a lot of people that are, dads that don't follow the team year round. And then they show up to the stadium and they can't even get a two deeps. Like they can't even put a face to a name when they sit down in the stands and try to figure out who's on the field. So that's what it kind of irks me. Like, what secrets are we trying to hide? Just put a depth chart out there. It doesn't have to be accurate, but at least give your fan base an idea of who's going to be on the field. So they can make a connection with the player. So when you send them an email, so when you call them, hey, yeah, we're trying to raise money so this guy doesn't enter the transfer portal, that fan will have a person to associate with instead of just a blank number.
Yeah, we got 85 guys on scholarship and we got 50 guys starting. It is funny that you bring up that point. I'll probably get dinged for saying this a little bit, but that's how most fans are nowadays. Like traditional recruiting, it kind of feels like, all right, it's kind of taking a back seat to the transfer portal and NIL. Most people I talk to are like, all right, wake me up when fall camp starts and just let me know who's on the roster. There's so much roster movement. It's very difficult to try to keep up with this guy. Commit, did he decommit? Did he flip? oh, did we lose this guy in the portal? Who do we replace him with? It's just very difficult. So as you mentioned, yes, it could give some clarity to the fans out there trying to keep up
Like,
with everything that's going on. All right, well, hold on. We do have to talk about Auburn because they have one of the top ranked players in the country on campus this weekend. 4-star quarterback Deuce Knight out of the state of Mississippi. Drew, there's been a ton of smoke about this one, including from our friend Tom Loy. Deuce Knight, if you know anything about him, you know that, well, he's been committed to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman for quite some time. There's been smoke in the Ole Miss direction. There's been smoke in the Auburn direction. Now it feels a little bit more tangible with Deuce Knight going to be on campus this weekend. There's been reports that something could happen as it pertains to a flip maybe this weekend. We shall see. Drew, I guess I'll tee you up and just ask you point blank, what would that flip mean in your eyes if Deuce Knight ends up flipping to the Auburn Tigers?
Is this the missing piece to the puzzle? And it's going to feel weird to say that after Auburn took, or landed, I should say, Walker White last cycle, a top 247 quarterback, a guy we really like, Cooper, someone you've compared to Will Levis. And when you did compare him to Will Levis, I think you got some blowback. Will Levis about to start year 2 in the NFL. So I think the script's going to change there a little bit. But Auburn, that number 5 ranked recruiting class, it is loaded on the defensive side of the ball at all 3 levels. They have loaded up, flipping guys, getting whoever they want. No wonder they have 37 defensive starters, because they're just bringing in more. And then the wide receivers from last cycle, the 4 you've been raving about since the Alabama-Mississippi game, headlined by Cam Coleman, who's going to take college football by storm here this season. The question is who's going to be the quarterback? And I think it could be Walker White. And I think if they get Deuce Knight, you can view him as the quarterback of the future as well. Now, he is very raw as a passer. And, I've seen the comments when you guys say he's raw as a passer, how is he ranked so high? It's because he has the upside. We have seen the flashes. I think he is one of the best outbreaking balls in the class. And then you bake that into the fact that if you drop this guy at the NFL Combine, he would have the highest vertical jump and probably the highest or the longest broad jump when it comes to the quarterback position. I mean, he's a freak. And you think about Hugh Freeze, that run pass option offense, Deuce Knight could be the perfect fit.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. In my head, immediately what I think about, what do they call them, those guys down there, those freshman 4 receivers? Do they have a name for them yet? I know they do. The Freeze 4, I think that's it. Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons, Bryce Kane. I think about those guys, and I think about, all right, how do we maximize the potential of those 4 receivers that I all think have Sunday ability at a really, really high level? And I kind of have to give kudos to Auburn and Will Redmond and the rest of their staff there for the job that they have done. They have been patient, but at the same time, they have operated with a lot of urgency. And what I mean by that is they haven't gone all out there and gone all in on a quarterback until it's made sense. They've been attached to names like Julian Lewis. They've been attached to names like KJ Lacey. I think if they wanted either of those guys at any point, I think they could have pulled the trigger. And quite honestly, I think they could have gotten them. With Deuce Knight, now you get a guy that raises the ceiling of your program and the players around you, which they have done a tremendous job over the last 2 cycles, building the rest of the roster while they've waited patiently for the quarterback position to kind of fall into their place. And that appears to be happening with Deuce Knight. We'll see if they land a commitment from him. But that's a huge, huge deal. And the other thing, I don't know how the timelines kind of marry up. You got Walker White there. You got Deuce Knight. Maybe it's another gap year with the transfer, or maybe there's something there with Hank Brown and Holden Gariner that can, placehold till one of those guys is ready. Drew, their outlook in that conference over the next 2 to 3 years, I'm as high on them as maybe anybody in that conference. I just kind of love what they're doing. They're stacking talent. They're doing a tremendous job in the state of Alabama. I think that's been a huge advantage of theirs since Nick Saban has retired. Auburn, to me, man, I mean, I get super excited about what they can be. And is there a more athletic potential combination that we could see between a quarterback and a receiving core than what Deuce Knight and those 4 receivers could potentially offer, not to mention Derek Smith coming in 2025 as well.
Yes. And the other thing I just want to point out, right? Auburn has had their way in the Yellowhammer State. You don't think Alabama's going to come back swinging here under Kalen DeBoer? That's what I'm anticipating.
Like in what way, though?
Auburn has taken advantage in state here in the 25 cycle. You look at the rankings 1 through 10. 8 of them are committed to the Tigers. I think 3 of the top players in 2026 in state are committed to the Tigers. I think we're going to see a surge from DeBoer, and it'll be dictated on how this season goes. But I wouldn't count out the Crimson Tide figuring it out, and that's just something I want to bring up.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I also don't know if like Alabama's sitting there feeling like they have a ton of pressure, to go recruit that state. All
right.
Let me phrase this the right way. Of course, they want to recruit guys in their backyard that can play at a high level, especially if they're going to go to Auburn at the end of the day. What I'm saying is they've recruited at a high enough level away from the Yellowhammer State where I think they can say, we're okay at this point. But yes, that is kind of a trend that you want to buck. You don't want Auburn to continue to kind of get a strong grip on everything that's happening.
Well, Brian Kelly learned really fast at LSU that you gotta recruit the boot. Can't keep pulling around from all around the country. All right. One thing is that before we get into the freshman 15, Tom Loy and his quarterback domino story, outlined some potential names if Deuce Knight were to defect from the Irish. I don't know, Coop, fire me up. I really like this list. Malik Washington, the Maryland commit, Bryce Baker, the North Carolina commit, Bjorn Jurgensen, my guy, here in Orlando, committed to Virginia, Chris Denson, Coastal Carolina commit, and then Jaron Kiwa Sagapolotoli. I get that?
Yeah, close enough.
The Cal committed at the Elite 11 finals. I've heard his name a ton here over the past week from different quarterback contacts about the start to his senior season. Any of those fire you up for?
I mean, I got people, banging down my door about that kid. Hey, have you watched him yet? You watched his tape yet? And obviously Hawaii football got started a little bit sooner than everybody else. Yeah, that name is interesting. I mean, Notre Dame has done a really good job, being in this situation. They were in a position where they had Dante Moore at some point, was never committed, I believe, if I remember correctly. But that's one. Yeah, was he committed at some point?
I don't know.
I can't remember. My mind is mush. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is they've done a good job at rebounding. They went late in the cycle. They flipped Kenny Minchie a couple years ago, who was committed to Pittsburgh. CJ Carr they had in the boat. I think they understand the position that they're in and kind of understand the realities of recruiting a guy like Deuce Knight, who Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman should be given a ton of credit for the early talent ID and the evaluation, getting them up the camp. They did everything that you could possibly imagine. I think at the end of the day, proximity to home and relationships and obviously financial incentives probably won out here in the situation at Deuce Knight. But back to the point at hand, I'm not really worried about Mike Denbrock or Notre Dame. I think they're going to have they're kind of in a weird way given this kind of advantage where they have to watch senior tape where most people are not afforded that opportunity. Everybody's got to make early decisions on these guys. Brian Stumpf talks about this all the time at Elite 11. It's such a race to get these guys in the boat, especially getting your quarterback. It's a little bit of like, all right, well, we got to take a shot here. We like the guy. We don't know everything about him. We hope it pans out. We'll see what it looks like over the next 2 years. To be frank, like ask Tennessee about that with George McIntyre, right? That's a guy that's kind of trending in opposite direction right now. And they don't have the freedom of flexibility to even kind of look around in that situation. So Notre Dame now gets to look at guys like Sagapolotele or other guys that you mentioned as well. Drew, there was one other kid, Bryce Baker at North Carolina. I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know how much. I don't know how much longer Mac Brown's got. I don't know what this year looks like for North Carolina. I thought they were underwhelming last year with a top 5 pick at the quarterback position. If they fall flat on their face, I think that would be the guy where I'm like, okay, let's start working that angle.
Well, I think Bryce Baker, the person, fits Notre Dame. Malik Washington's the one to me that jumps out. Season opener, his team, Archbishop Spalding, goes up to Ohio, plays Archbishop Hoban, number 3 ranked team in the state. Malik Washington throws 3 touchdowns, runs for another, I think, over 230 passing, 80 on the ground. Hudson Standish was raving about him in that performance. So he's one where my eyes kind of light up. And then I said Bjorn Jurgensen committed to Virginia. Florida's been looking for a quarterback here in the class of 2025. To me, I think he's someone where another program is going to take a swipe at him. And Virginia's done a really good job at the high school ranks. Anthony Calandria comes to mind, under the radar kid that has had some success there in the ACC.
All right, fact check from Tom Lloyd says, no, Dante Moore was not committed to Notre Dame, but he did make a silent commitment. Things went south when they pushed for CJ Carr in 2024. Other things impacted that as well. So there you go, a little context from Tom Lloyd. See, Drew, I thought right. He was not committed, or maybe he was silent commit, but we didn't know that publicly. All right, guys, just a reminder, 247sports.com. promo right now, 75% off for annual membership. This runs from August 29th through September 3rd. Fan Appreciation Day, free VIP on August 29th. That is tomorrow. Make sure, guys, to subscribe to 247sports.com. Everything you need from a football, college football, recruiting, basketball, all of it, all right here at 247sports.com. All right, time for the Oyster Boys Freshman 15. I'm excited about this, Drew. I didn't know we were going 15 deep. I saw the rundown this morning. I said, all right, Drew's getting after it. Got a couple Celsius in him. I love your list. What I tried to do is just not pick a name that you had.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing I was curious about, was there any kind of like rhyme or rhythm to the positionals, or was it just like, let me go pick my favorite players?
Well, I think, last year we went conference by conference, team by team, and me and you both named one freshman we thought was going to play or make an impact, and we had some big hits. This year, due to obligations, a lot of obligations, we didn't have the opportunity to do that. So I thought freshman 15, which is, funny play on when you start college, freshman 15. Like, hey, let's try to throw some names out here. Yeah, there's some obvious ones, but guys we've heard buzz on. Guys, when we look at the two deeps, we think, okay, this kid's going to play. Just kind of trying to call our shots. And I was going to give you we could have doubled up. I wasn't trying to take all the good guys, but I thought it would be interesting. Just some individuals we are buying stock in. So,
all right, let's start with your team then. Producer Chris, if you don't mind. Yes, thank you. The full screen graphic here. I know if you're listening over audio, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but if you're on YouTube, you have a good idea. All right, Drew's freshman 15. And for audio purposes, Drew, I'm going to go through all of these. Okay, we got Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, Bryant Wesco, 3 extremely talented receivers. Colin Simmons from Texas, top 247 edge rusher. Dylan Raiola, Nick Marsh, big fan of Andrew Ivins. Xavier Brown, Jordan Seaton at Colorado, Elijah Lofton, Jaden Jackson, DJ Lagway, PJ Woodland, been turning a lot of heads in Baton Rouge. DJ Warner from Kansas, love that. Day Farmer, receiver at West Virginia, and then Clemson's kicker, Nolan Hauser. Like that, snuck that one in there. I like that. I like this list, man. I mean, it's loaded. The good thing about it is these are all guys that, I mean, obviously that's why we did the list. These are all guys that you would expect to play early. One guy that I think, I mean, we've talked a lot about these guys. So let me just point out the guys that, in my opinion, we haven't really dished out on, Drew, and I'll give you the floor. Nick Marsh, I know you love it, Michigan State. Elijah Lofton at Miami. I think we need to get ahead of that one. Jaden Jackson from IMG, you were plenty familiar with. He's going to get the start at Oklahoma on the defensive line. PJ Woodland, I got to see at Alabama, Mississippi. He's a guy, might be one of the best players in that secondary already at LSU. Then DJ Warner at Kansas, fired up about, and then Day Farmer at West Virginia. So the floor is yours. Just wanted to, as a friend, those were the dudes that I thought, like, okay, I hadn't heard those names in a while.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about the big time wide receivers. I think Elijah Lofton is very interesting. Miami is using him at running back a little bit. Talk to some people that have seen some practices there. They say this kid, they're going to get him involved, and you can put the tweener label on him. He doesn't have the prototypical size. I was actually standing next to him on the sidelines over the weekend. He went to see Bishop Gorman play, and I'm like, oh, this is Elijah Lofton. Like he is stout. He's well put together. Cooper, I just think he's a really tough kid. Shannon Dawson, I think they're going to get creative. It might not be this Saturday Elijah Lofton's out there, but I think at some point during the season, he's going to have a big game. He's going to come up at a key moment. PJ Woodland, interested. I want to pick your brain on him. I think if it was up to some people in Baton Rouge, PJ Woodland would be starting week 1 against USC there in Las Vegas. I think they're trying to ease him in, but I expect by late September, early October, he's in that lineup. I think there's some people at LSU that think he's the top corner they have on the roster right now, and that might speak to the level of talent. The good news, if you're an LSU fan, Corey Raymond has absolutely loaded up here in the 2025 class. But Coop, do you remember PJ Woodland? Like you said, you saw him at the Alabama-Mississippi game. He's a 3-star prospect for us. Hey, 3 stars are still players. We're not going to get them all right. It seems like he has, evolved really, really fast there.
3 stars are people too. We say that all the time. Yeah, I saw him in Alabama, Mississippi, and he was a guy, quite honestly, like you go into that event and he's already committed to LSU, and you're kind of like thinking to yourself, like, all right, well, you're not looking at him through a different lens, but you're wondering to yourself, all right, is this kind of match up with the level that I think an LSU defensive back should look like? And PJ Woodland was a guy, when I saw him there in Hattiesburg, he was pretty slight, narrow of frame. Really liked the reactionary traits. I liked the way he got in and out of his breaks. He was an instinctual kid. But if you were to tell me that I thought that he would be getting significant snaps in week 1 against USC in a primetime game that LSU needs to win, I would, I wouldn't call you crazy, but I'd be pretty surprised about that. And I don't know if that says more about PJ Woodland or more about LSU's secondary. My feeling is it says a lot about both. Woodland's a kid that I liked. We'll see what happens and kind of how that turns out. But I know they love him there. And I think from what we've gathered, I think he's surprised some people in that building as well, right? It wasn't like, all right, we're going to get this guy on campus and he's going to be in this position. So credit to him a lot. All right, Drew, you ready to take a look at mine?
One more. I want to highlight one more guy. Okay. Jaden Jackson at Oklahoma. We moved him into the top 247 late after a senior eval. Every time I was at IMG Academy, Jaden Jackson's the guy. Jaden Jackson's the guy. He's the alpha. He's the dude, which was notable because the person next to him was David Stone, who also signed with Oklahoma, who is also there and is not listed as a starter. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I've been trying to think through that, why Jaden Jackson? I just think it's the toughness. I think it's the mindset. He's a go-getter. He's a leader. And then you look at a kid like David Stone, who, his recruiting process, Cooper, it was all over the place. I remember at one point we were there for like pro day and he wouldn't name the top schools he was considering. It's like, man, you've visited Oklahoma, I think 48 times here since you were a freshman. You're going to tell us Oklahoma's not a top school. So that was interesting. 2 more. Nolan Hauser at Clemson. They had major kicking issues last season. He was my number 2 ranked kicker. He's going to make a big one at some point. And remember this. You're going to be like Andrew Ivins said it on the 24/7 Sports College Football Recruiting Show. Nolan Hauser is going to hit it. And then the last one, Day Farmer, wide receiver for West Virginia. I keep reading camp reports about this guy. They play Penn State. I don't know if it's going to be week 1, but they are excited about him. Late flip from UCF. So that's my freshman 15. I had a bunch of honorable mentions, but we don't have time for that.
All right, I like it. I like it a lot. All right, Belchi, let's get to my list. And Drew, I guess, well, hold on. Let me read it for those of you at home listening via podcast. Ryan Williams, Alabama. TJ Moore, Clemson. Ryan Wingo, Texas. Dylan Stewart, South Carolina. All 4 of those guys, 5 stars, low-hanging fruit there. Damon Williams, Washington. Jordan Shipp, North Carolina. Marcellus Williams, USC. Kevin Haywood, Wisconsin. Christian Bentoncourt, Clemson. William Eccles, Ole Miss. Nate Frazier, Georgia. Jalen Mbakwe, Alabama. Amaris Williams, Auburn. Malcolm Simmons, Auburn. Drew, your thoughts? Anything stand out to you?
Well, you're leaving Terry Bussey off the list.
Oh, my bad. Bussey at 15, athlete. You put the specialist there at number 15, so I snuck him in. Yeah, 15, Terry Bussey.
Bussey's not on A&M's depth chart that I read last night while watching The Bachelor.
What's
but
that about?
I think he's going to play, right?
I would hope so.
Yeah, he might be an all-purpose type of selection. What jumps out to me? Talk to me about Damon Williams, because I really wanted to put him on mine. I had DJ Lagway, Dylan Raiola on there. I think he is the true freshman quarterback no one is talking about that could make some big splash. Like if we get to November, let's say, and Washington is, fighting for bowl eligibility. I think he's one.
They had more roster turnover than the majority of programs around the country. I think that plays into it. Will Rogers there from Mississippi State to transfer, and I think if they play their cards right, they're in a really unique position to have Will Rogers kind of navigate the first half of the schedule. And then once the expectations kind of drop off in that second half of the season, I think you can start getting Damon Williams some run in a similar way that they did with Noah Fafita there in Tucson and getting his feet wet. So I kind of see the succession plan already in place. I think they're fired up about Damon Williams. I think Damon Williams is kind of a special cat, unique in the way that he should be able to kind of handle the pressure of playing earlier. You're not going to rattle him or mess up his mental makeup going forward. So I think Jed Fish is one of those guys always kind of thinking ahead, big picture wise. And I think Damon Williams is going to get some run. I don't think we're talking about him here in August, but, he was a guy that was kind of pushing there in the spring. Drew, I like the kid. I think he's a total gamer. I don't really look any further than the success that they had with a similar quarterback in Noah Fafita. I just think it makes way too much sense.
All right, Dylan Stewart, I agree. Like that pick, edge rusher, South Carolina. Now they returned some talent there, but did you see, Cooper, Josiah Thompson is apparently going to start at left tackle for the Gamecocks. He's listed with an oar next to Tree Babalade. I guess Shane Beamer said on some radio show Monday night that they're likely going to start a true freshman at left tackle. I'll say this about Josiah Thompson. Saw him at the Shrine Bowl. Technically buttoned up kid. Everything you're looking for in a left tackle. He was just lean. Surprised the Gamecocks are going to roll with him if we're being frank.
They might not have an option. I mean, their offensive line hasn't really been that good. And Josiah Thompson's everything that you want from like a physical trait standpoint outside of the frame a little bit, and that's going to be the biggest thing once they get in the SEC play. How's he going to hold up physically? Because I think he was hovering around 275, 285. That's a lot to ask of that kid to go into SEC ball and be your corner protector for Lenora Sellers. It's kind of a sneaky big year for Shane Beamer. So that's a lot riding on it. Kid's going to be a heck of a player. I kind of thought he was like 2 years in the weight room, get him beefed up, and then we'll see what he looks like. For him to be playing early, it's a little bit of a stunner. But I also wonder how much like the NIL stuff kind of plays into this, right? Like I got an oar next to his name. I'm paying this guy a bunch of money, like you said. Like, yeah, we got to show that we're kind of invested in this dude and he might be ready to play, so I don't know.
Talk to me about Nate Frazier, right? I think everyone is going to turn on the TV Saturday. You're going to watch Game Day or the CBS Sports new pregame show, and you're going to get to that noon game, Clemson, Georgia. And I think Nate Frazier is a guy that could get a carry in the first quarter, right?
Yeah, more than that. I mean, I think they're going to have to rely on him, right? I mean, they're banged up in that running back room. ETN probably not going to play. Roderick Robinson has been banged up. You got Branson Robinson, who's very different than Nate Frazier. And then you got Nate Frazier, who's Mighty Mouse. I mean, what is he, Drew? 5'8", 5'9", but he's rocked up, run sub 10.7. He can go. He was playing in the backfield last year with Jordan Davison at Modern Day, where Davison was the guy. Nate Frazier was always the guy that your eyes gravitated to big play waiting to happen, plays bigger than his frame. You can utilize him out of the backfield as a receiver as well. Yeah, he's a guy ready to play. They're fired up about him in Athens. It's going to be a big test, his first test coming against a very, very good Clemson defense and one of the most talented front sevens in the country.
Neither of us had Luke Reynolds. I feel like that's a disappointment, the Penn State tight end.
Gosh, that is a disappointment. James Franklin kind of scared me away a little bit. They're just so good there.
Yeah.
They're good at that position. I can actually see him ripping off the red shirt, playing 6-7 games, and then seeing a lot more of them as a sophomore.
Is there any point in redshirting these kids these days?
Well, give me your reason.
The roster movement, like a guy like Luke Reynolds, like just play.
If you think he can play and help your team, then play him.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Drew, that about does it for us. Any final thoughts here as we go into this season? Like anything you want to get off your chest? You're like, hey, I want to make sure you remember this dude, or I want to make sure that you remember this thought, or remember I said this on this show. Is there anything you want to say?
I got some honorable mentions. I'm going to go real fast. Louisville running back Isaac Brown. They have lost a lot in the backfield. Kid out of Dade County, exit 1 in Florida. I think he's someone that's going to play for the Cardinals. Might be the only freshman that plays for a program that is so invested in the transfer portal. At Purdue, Shamar Rigby is going to start at wide receiver. Cooper and Tavion Grant, reclassified corner, that was a top 247 prospect. I was shocked when I saw that. I've heard good things at Miami about Justin Scott and Armando Blount, and they also might roll with a true freshman corner in OJ Frederick. Jaden Baugh at Florida. I'm buying stock. We keep talking about DJ Lagway, LJ McCray. Keep an eye on Jaden Baugh, the running back. They flipped him from Arkansas. Ja'Cory Barney at Nebraska, wide receiver. Dylan Raiola is going to have to throw past this to someone. Cooper, also notable. Carter Nelson, listed as a slot receiver at Houston. Kobe Young, I like. And then the final one, Wisconsin, Xavier Lucas. Ricardo Hallman had a quote there and said something about Ricardo Hallman's at Wisconsin from South Florida. He's going to be drafted. They asked him about Xavier Lucas, and he said, I don't know how the Florida schools let this kid get out of Florida. That one's been sticking with me.
The name of the young running back, Wisconsin, not Dylan Jones, the other one.
Oh, yeah. That I will say this. That is something else I noticed. Not a lot of running backs I could find are expected to play true freshmen. I find that hard to believe. So,
which is typically the position where you see him play early, right?
I know.
Going to be interesting. All right, a couple guys we didn't mention that I want to make sure we mention before the season starts. Viliamu Asa. I think that's going to be a guy that's going to get more and more run for Notre Dame as the season goes on. Trades Green at LSU.
Yeah,
a lot of good things about him already. I want to make sure we put that out into the universe. And Cooper Cousins at Penn State. Our type of meathead, our type of guy. Dude's going to be an All-American at some point in his career, so we're fired up about him. All right, Drew, that's all I got.
Are you getting the Cooper Cousins sweater? Is that on the way yet?
I'm going to have to. By the way, Deshaun McBride, also turning heads. His name is not Deshaun McBride anymore.
Yeah.
It's Deshaun Spears. All right, so you see him running around in Las Vegas on Sunday. You know the Oyster Boys told you. Guys, we appreciate you watching. As always, for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. Have a great week 1. We'll see you next week.